My dark web experience, the visiting. This occurred not long after I turned 18 years old. My girlfriend had also just turned 18 a few days ago, which meant her parents had finally trusted her and I to be alone in the house while they went out for dinner. My girlfriend had always been a fan of horror films and creepy things in general. She loved reading creepypastas and watching dark and gory films such as Hostel and Saw. One evening, I was sitting with her while she finished watching the last few minutes of The Human Centipede. We both had a few drinks and I was about to go to bed, but she suggested we look for other horror films to watch online. Despite my tiredness, I obliged. A few minutes of searching on her laptop revealed all of her favorite online film sites had been taken down. That's when she suggested a chilling alternative. "Ever heard of the dark web?" she asked. I had heard whispers around school about it, but never took much interest. "Yeah, I have," I replied, trying to act brave. A smile of excitement appeared on her face. I could tell she was slightly drunk and in that sort of I don't care what happens mood. I decided to go to the kitchen to fetch her some water. When I came back, I noticed she had a site opened called SensorView. The site displayed the pictures of movie posters I had never seen before. I correctly assumed it was a site that sold banned horror films from other countries. All of them looked pretty unoriginal, nothing I hadn't seen before. All except for one. The one my girlfriend was hovering the mouse clicker over. The movie was called The Visiting. The display picture was simply a white background with The Visiting written in Arial black font. We were both fascinated as to what it was. I took out my iPhone and searched for the plot of the film, yet I found nothing. Just a few stupid YouTube videos and irrelevant forums. However, when I looked back up from my phone, I caught a glimpse of my girlfriend typing in her name and address into various boxes on a page titled Order Details. Before, to my horror, she clicked the Submit button. I was caught in a state of anger and shock. I manically shouted at her, explaining how dangerous it was dispersing her personal details into such a fucked up place as the dark web. I could see my attempts to correct her were futile, as the alcohol was hitting her hard and she was not paying attention whatsoever. Frustrated, I went to bed deciding to discuss it with her the next morning. The next morning she seemed to have little regret over her actions. She spent the morning explaining how she was curious and she was in no danger. She even commented that the experience would be fun. However, I wasn't convinced. She told me not to tell her parents, fearing they would not trust her to be alone in the house again. I promised not to say anything and headed back home. 3 days later, I was visiting her house again. Her parents had gone to meet with some friends from work for a drink and we were watching The Exorcist on DVD. During a particularly non-eventful part of the film, my girlfriend began joking about how horrified I looked a few days ago when we were discussing the dark web. She said she had only received a fairly professional-looking email confirming the order and nothing else. I began to yield to her argument. Perhaps I was overreacting. It was merely seconds after our conversation finished that an aggressive knock came from the door. It sounded like it was from 2 doors, but I dismissed this as an echo. I began to look concerned, while my girlfriend began laughing once again at the look of terror on my face. I put on a fake smile as I walked towards the door. It erased clean from my face when I saw who stood outside. A tall, stocky man wearing a ski mask and dark clothes stood at the front door, wielding a hammer. I was about to call out to my girlfriend to call the police when a blood-curdling scream echoed through the house. I raced back into the room to see my girlfriend pointing at the window facing the garden. An identical man stood at the window, only he was holding a small bat. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and sprinted up the stairs. We hid in the master bedroom while I called the police on my mobile, who told me they would be there as soon as possible. As I finished the call, I heard one of the doors smash and loud, rapid footsteps heading up the stairs. They were in the house. Without thinking, I pushed the window open and told my girlfriend to jump, run, and not to look back. She jumped and landed safely onto the grassy garden below. I was about to follow, but hesitated, wondering if I could put up a fight, and in doing so, allow my girlfriend more time to escape. It was then I heard a deep, aggressive voice just outside the room. The man shouted something in a foreign language whilst I heard laughs from 2 other men outside. All bravery evaporated and I jumped, landing harshly on my ankle. The adrenaline racing around my body allowed me to power through the pain, and I eventually caught up to my girlfriend. We were running for what seemed like hours, but in reality was most likely 10 minutes. We ended up next to the local park, a safe distance away from the house. My girlfriend began sobbing, and I comforted her, trying to avoid my own desire to break down. It was not long after that, when the police called me on my mobile, they were at the house, and as far as they could tell, the attackers were gone. After taking a few minutes to compose ourselves, my girlfriend and I made our way back. There were 3 police officers at the house. One was examining each room for any damage or evidence left by the men. One was comforting my girlfriend, while the other asked me questions. The shock was clouding my memory. I was only able to tell them a few details about their clothing and the fact they spoke in an Eastern European language. My girlfriend handed over her phone and computer for the police to investigate, and they left. They advised us tell the homeowners of the situation, lock up, and suggested that everyone spend the rest evening with friends or a relative. So we both spent the night at my parents' house, while my girlfriend's parents stayed with friends. I remember my girlfriend crying over the phone while telling them about the situation. They were furious. A few days later, the police visited my girlfriend. It was by luck that I was at her house that afternoon. Their investigations had led them to some disturbing findings. It turned out the visiting was a nickname locals in a small Polish town gave to a number of brutal murders that occurred in the 90s in the local area. The murders were committed by an unknown gang and were initially dismissed as home invasions gone wrong. All the victims were bludgeoned to death in their homes, although nothing of value was taken from the house. It was only 2 years after the murders began that a family survived an attack by the gang. The husband was able to give the Polish police a few details of the attackers, but all that he revealed was that they wore ski masks, wielded blunt objects, and one had a video camera. However, the crucial evidence was that one of the attackers had dropped a backpack containing 1 blank videotape and 3 other tapes with content on them. The 3 tapes showed the horrific murders of the other victims of the attackers. The police came to a shocking conclusion that these men were creating snuff films to be sold to whatever sickos paid enough for them. A nationwide manhunt began, but after years of investigation, nothing was found. I remember feeling incredibly cold as the police told me their findings. They went on to tell me that the men most likely fled Poland during the police search and could possibly have entered the UK as workers when Poland joined the European Union. The only thing they knew for certain was that these men were operating once again, decades after their last murder, and they were using the dark web as a way of deciding on their next victims. The police told my girlfriend's family to move in with a relative while the investigation was ongoing. It was not long after that when my girlfriend broke up with me by her parents' wishes. I assumed her parents suspected me of forcing her into using the dark web. My girlfriend discovered later that various documents containing her information had been taken from the house. I'm not allowed to see her, but our parents still speak. From what they tell me, her mental state has become incredibly fragile. It broke my heart to hear this. I can safely say the police will never find the attackers using the information I gave, which means they will most likely strike again. I can only hope the next time they do, it will lead to those bastards ending up behind bars and not the creation of another tape to add to their collection. Be safe and avoid the dark web. Journey to the dark web. To begin, I think I should explain to some readers the difference between the deep web and the dark web. The deep web was a place that was accessible online by the use of special web browsers such as Tor that contains less than legal things such as drugs, human trafficking, and hitmen for hire. The dark web was pretty much everything that was no longer available by conventional means, such as military websites and other sites that have not been incorporated into the current internet architecture. With that in mind, I would like to convey to you all my story of my accidental journey into the unknown space known as the dark web. I'm a computer technician by profession. I worked for a company that was contracted by local businesses and private consumers to set up internet connections, install software, and repair any sort of computer problems they can come up with. So naturally, I got all the crazy stories and problems that these people could come up with. I swear, some of these people just don't know how to work a computer, even in this day and age. Anyway, one day I got a call from a local business complaining that their internet was acting up and that they must have a virus. So I shook my head, thinking that someone must have unplugged a network cable or downloaded a Trojan horse accidentally, got up and drove over to the business to address the problem. As soon as I arrived, the man who called me immediately spotted me and started going on and on about hackers and how much he hated Microsoft Windows and how many viruses it created and all that nonsense that I usually received when addressing business problems. He led me to his computer and I pulled out my laptop and sat down in front of it and began to work. He told me good luck and walked away to go do whatever it was he did in his downtime. I opened up the browser he used, no surprise, and it opened to about blank. It didn't even have a home page. So I tried connecting to google.com, 404 error. Well, I know that google.com definitely existed, so there was a problem with his internet connection. I opened his network and sharing center to see if I could use the built-in troubleshooter to diagnose the problem, but I gave myself a well-deserved facepalm when I saw that he wasn't connected to any network at all. So I searched for networks and found a few wireless connections for him to connect to. They're all WEP encrypted, and I was almost positive that he didn't know the key, so I broke out my laptop and ran a WEP cracking tool to get his computer up and running again. As I was waiting for my tool to find the WEP key, another network suddenly showed up on my computer, this one unprotected with an SSID consisting of a random hexadecimal string. Now, I was extremely bored waiting for this guy to return, so I decided to connect to it and take a little look around to see where it was coming from. I connected without problems and opened up my toolkit of cracking tools to see if I could find a source for this connection. As I was having my fun, hacking away at this unprotected network, my computer froze up, albeit only for a second or two. But this didn't happen much, and it caught me by surprise. I shrugged it off as the poor internet speed there and kept on going. A couple minutes later, however, it happened again. And a few minutes after that, once again, each time getting longer and longer. Weird, I thought to myself. What's with this network? It was then that things started getting really interesting. After the long string of pauses, my screen flickered a little bit and, out of nowhere, my browser opened by itself. Now I was worried that I had somehow infected my computer with some kind of malware by connecting to this network, and I proceeded to close the browser and began to disconnect from the network before anything worse could happen. But I couldn't disconnect. No matter how many times I clicked the little disconnect button, my computer didn't respond, despite everything else on my screen running fine. Fuck, I thought to myself. This is going to be a long day. And just as I was about to hit the power button on my laptop to perform a hard reset, my browser opened again. This time, with a little chat box opened. Hello. I stared at the screen for a couple seconds, not quite sure what was going on. I want to talk to you. Now, I had heard about those AI programs that had these programmed responses to simulate conversation with people, and I was not impressed. This was one nasty virus. You need to leave this network now. This is your last warning. Maybe an automated security program designed to keep hackers out. I'll have to admit, I was impressed with it. I had never seen anything like this before. I'm telling you one last time. Leave now. I don't know what made me do it, but I responded to the program. Or what? The next response scared me more than anything in this world ever had. The program began listing information about me, my name, address, telephone number, credit card information, my parents' names, their address. My heart sank in my chest and all the colour immediately left my face. I couldn't move. I just sat there, paralysed with fear. But what came next was even worse. Don't look at me like that. My webcam was on. You really shouldn't stare. Age 3 man 4694. You might see something you regret. Suddenly, the most horrifying images you could ever imagine flashed on my screen. Images of disemboweled humans, human sacrifice, detached limbs, cannibals eating people, video clips of mass suicides and firing lines. My heart was racing, my body was shaking in utter fear of the images I was being shown. They're seared in my brain. Those were things that no one should ever see. I mustered the strength I had left and hit the power button on my computer and slammed it shut. I ran to the bathroom and threw up a couple times. I was drenched in sweat. I could barely compose myself. It took me about 20 minutes to go back to my computer, and even then, I had a hard time getting near it. I looked over at my client's computer, and it was connected to the wireless network I was cracking earlier. It was working fine now. Just then, my client returned and thanked me for fixing his internet. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed my laptop and left. Going down the elevator with my laptop under my shoulder was terrible. I just wanted to leave that place and get my laptop replaced as soon as I could. 5th floor, 4th floor. Come on, come on. 3rd floor, 2nd floor. Come on, goddammit. Ping, ground floor. Open up, come on. And just as the doors opened, from behind me, a whisper, "You really shouldn't stare, H. Freeman 4694. I immediately left the office building and drove back to my office. I promptly gave my laptop to my boss, telling him that it had become non-functional and that I required a replacement. I told him that someone had accidentally spilled coffee on it during my last trip and that it short-circuited. In reality, I made a pit stop on my way back to a hardware store and bought the most powerful magnet I could find and ran it over the hard drive several times. I wasn't risking that thing ever turning on again. So, after a few short minutes of the keep better track of your shit speech, he took the laptop and told me that I would get my replacement tomorrow. It was probably the most satisfying thing I could ever hear. For a few days, everything was back to normal. No more AI chat boxes, no more funky, unprotected internet connections, no more disturbing images popping up on my screen. I was safe until the nightmares started. I remember the first one I had very vividly, and I shudder when I think about it, but I'll tell you nevertheless. It began with me walking through a large city. I remember seeing large buildings and people walking up and down the streets on their way to work or shopping, whatever it is city people do. As I was walking, I found myself in front of a very large building, much taller than the rest, and for some reason, I wanted to go inside and take a look. So I walked through the front doors and took a look around. It was a fairly normal office building, people moving about talking on their cell phones and whatnot, minding their own business. I realized that there really wasn't much to see here, so I turned around to leave, but something was wrong. The doors to the building were gone. I walked forward, thinking that they were some new type of door that blended into the wall or something, but nothing was there. I found myself very confused. So I turned back around again to maybe ask the receptionist where the exit was, but she was gone too. Everyone was gone. The lobby was empty. No sounds, no people, no furniture, just an empty white room. Now I was scared. I began to panic and pace around the room, looking for any way out, but there was nothing, nowhere to go. So I began to run at the walls, trying to break them down, but all my attempts were futile. After about 4 or 5 bum rushes against the walls, I sat down, out of breath, looking down at the floor. It felt like I was there for hours, just staring at the ground, when, suddenly, I heard a small whisper. I looked up to see a black silhouette of a man facing me. He stuck out his hand and whispered ever so slightly, "Trying to leave?" For some reason, I trusted this figure. Don't ask me why, dream logic. But I felt like this figure was going to show me the way out somehow. So, I took his hand and got up and said, "Yes, can you show me the way?" "Of course, follow closely." He turned around and began to hover away from me, so I followed. I don't know how, but he began to create hallways and staircases out of the room I was trapped in, leading me all sorts of ways as if through a giant labyrinth. We climbed up and up and up until we finally reached a hallway that had a door at the end of it. It was then that he stopped moving and turned back toward me. I could make out a faint smile on his face as he pointed toward the door. "Is this the exit?" "It is." I was so happy to finally get out of this place, so I grabbed the door handle and began to turn it as he placed his hand on my shoulder. I turned to look at him, and his words made my heart race to this day. But remember, She-3Man 4694, you shouldn't ever stare. My eyes widened as his face began to morph into that of a horrible horned creature. His teeth became like razors and his mouth was filled with fire. I threw him off of me and opened the door, only to find my worst fears behind it. Dead people were hanging from the ceiling and blood covered the room like wallpaper. I screamed, but nothing came out. I turned away from the room and ran as fast as I could back the way I came. But it was not long before I realized that I was hopelessly lost in this labyrinth that the demon had led me through. I ran and ran but couldn't find the way out. There was no way out. I was trapped in this nightmare. I started hurling myself at the walls in an attempt to leave this evil place, but nothing was working. I thought I was going to die here, and that was when I awoke. I was drenched in sweat, my heart racing and my breathing was heavy. I looked around and it took me a couple of minutes to realize that it was just a nightmare. A horrible, horrible nightmare. I got up out of my bed and walked over to my bathroom to wash myself of all the sweat I had just doused myself in. As I washed my face, I noticed something in the mirror, a small light coming from my room. I turned around and I saw it, sitting at the foot of my bed. My personal computer. I slowly walked over to examine it, thinking I had accidentally left it on before going to bed, which I rarely do. So I bent down and picked it up. Command prompt was open, but it was blank. No prompt or anything, just that little black box with the white cursor flashing at me. It was then that I remembered that I didn't even use my computer before going to bed. In fact, I had left it in the kitchen. My webcam light turned on. Command prompt began to type. What's the matter? H3Man 4694. Bad dream? Now, immediately after seeing what had appeared on my screen, I did what anyone else would have done. I removed the battery from my computer, threw it into a safe that I kept in my bedroom, and locked it tight. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floor, paralyzed with fear. This was no ordinary nightmare. This was real. For the next few days, I had the same nightmare every night, each time as traumatizing as the first. And worst of all, each time, after waking up, I could hear my laptop fan inside that safe. I knew what it was doing, but I never looked. I didn't want to see that message again. I didn't want to scar myself even further. After 3 nights of experiencing that terrible nightmare, I stopped sleeping. I couldn't see those horrible images anymore. I couldn't face that demon anymore. It was too much for me. I kept myself up with caffeine and vitamin B. My motor functions declined and my cognitive ability deteriorated after the 2nd consecutive night. I was so weak, so tired, so afraid. On my 3rd day of self-induced insomnia, my boss walked over to my desk and gave it to me straight. You look like dried up dog shit, man. Go home, get some sleep. I looked up at him. I wanted to tell him so badly, but I know if I did, he would just tell me to get my shit together and come back tomorrow. So I nodded my head in agreement, picked up my stuff, and walked out. As I was driving home, I turned on the radio to help keep me awake. I had not slept in almost 60 hours, but instead of my favorite tunes, all that came out of my car's speakers was static, just a bunch of white noise. I started changing channels, but everything was the same, static, so I turned it off and drove home in silence. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed through my front window that there was a flickering light coming from inside my house. It was my TV. I left the damn thing on before leaving to work. I wasn't surprised though. Not sleeping for 2 consecutive nights was definitely taking a toll on me. I put the car in park and started to pull the keys out when my radio turned on again. More static. Was I hallucinating? Christ, I'm losing it. No, you're not. I almost shit my pants. Did that come from the radio? Either I've gone nuts or that was extremely coincidental. I'm still here, you know. Holy fuck. This time I was sure. That deep static voice just came out of the speakers of my car. I looked at my radio to see what station it was tuned to, but the screen was just a bunch of random symbols and letters that didn't make any sense. I started to panic. I immediately turned the car off and almost ran into my house. No, they couldn't follow me everywhere. I locked my computer in my safe. This couldn't be happening to me. I whipped around to look at my television, which I had forgotten was still on. I swear, I wished that the goddamn Teletubbies were on. In fact, I wished there was anything on. But there wasn't. It was just static. No sound, no signal, just static. Boom! I almost fell over backward in fear. The television sound came in with a huge bang, and the static was very audible. White noise filled the room. I could feel my heart pounding as my hands began to shake. No! No, please, no! The static began to get louder and louder until I couldn't even hear myself think. I covered my ears and began shouting to myself, "Stop it! Stop it now! Please!" And it stopped. I looked up slowly at my television. Nothing. Black screen. It was off. I stood up slowly, still shaking from what had just happened. I walked slowly toward my television, fearing that it may turn on again and blow my eardrums out. I got right up next to the screen, reached behind my TV, and unplugged the power cord. I stared at it for a couple seconds, hoping I had stopped them from gaining access. I backed away slowly, breathing more evenly now. I stopped it, and that's when I saw that face on my television screen, that black silhouette from my dreams. It was here. It was real. He smiled at me with the most evil smile you could possibly imagine, and I couldn't look away. I was too afraid to move. And suddenly, he began to speak in the most frightening voice imaginable. It was deep and booming, somewhat distorted as if he was speaking through a voice masker. It sounded like 10 voices in one, all as evil as the other. "Do you fear me, Hey3Man 4694? I couldn't move. I said, "Do you fear me?" My body was shaking uncontrollably. "Do you know these people?" The next images I saw were the most traumatizing images in my lifetime. I saw pictures of my family, my friends, people I had met throughout my life. He had them. This couldn't have been happening. "I told you not to stare." And, probably out of sheer adrenaline, I snapped out of my paralysis and picked up a small glass bottle sitting on the table next to me and hurled it as hard as I could at the TV. Sparks went everywhere. Shattered glass covered the floor. I looked up at the TV and it was broken. The screen had cracked and it was no longer functioning. The demon was gone. I mustered what strength I had left and walked up to my room. I was so tired. I fell to my knees and began to cry when suddenly I heard it. My laptop fan. I slowly raised my head and there it was. Sitting on the edge of my bed. Command prompt open, webcam on. The screen read, "That wasn't very nice, H3Man 4694. I screamed as loud as I could, "Leave me the fuck alone!" and picked up my laptop and threw it out the window as hard as I could. This was going to end today. I walked over to the window I had thrown my computer out of to make sure that it was shattered. I wanted nothing to be left of it. But as I looked out the window, I didn't see any broken laptop. I saw him, looking up at me, smiling. I backed away slowly from my window. I couldn't think. I couldn't comprehend anything at the moment. He was real. He was here. I backed up into my room, slammed the door shut, and sat on the floor, trying to formulate some kind of plan of escape from this thing, or, more importantly, how to rid myself of this demon forever. Bang, bang, bang! I immediately stood upright. He was knocking at my front door. Bang, bang, bang! Again, I heard it. He wanted in. I heard him knocking over and over again, incessant pounding on my front door, always in threes. I began thinking frantically. What was I going to do? Should I stay in here? Should I get a weapon? Should I call the police? I didn't know. And the knocking continued. I was pacing my room, desperately trying to think of what to do. My heart was racing, my body purely running on adrenaline at this point. And suddenly, as if perfectly on cue, the knocking stopped. I stopped pacing. Was he gone? Did he just decide to leave? I had to be sure. I slowly opened my door and looked around. Nothing. I moved out of my room and toward the stairs and peeked down. Still nothing. I slowly moved down the stairs and saw my broken TV and the shattered glass on the floor. Was it over? As I made my way into the living room, I began to feel cold, very cold. I looked around to see if I could find my thermostat when something else caught my eye. My front door. It was wide open. I swear, I almost had a heart attack. Was he inside? I had no way of knowing, but the first thing that came to mind was that I had to close that door in case he wasn't. So I quickly moved to the door and slammed it shut. It wasn't cold anymore. I slumped down, back against my front door. I was unbearably tired. I needed to sleep. More than anything in this world, I just needed to sleep. My eyes began to close. My muscles began to relax. My breathing slowed. And right as my eyes shut and the shroud of sleep began to cover me, his face right in front of me. My eyes snapped open to see his face right up against mine. He was staring at me, smiling. I had no strength left to do anything about it. He slowly stood up and reached out his hand. He said to me in the evil whisper of his, "Get up, I want to show you something." I shook my head in disagreement. There was no goddamn way that I was following him. He was going to force me to live that nightmare. He was going to finish killing my mind before he was going to destroy my body. I said, "Get up. You have no other choice." All I could do was look at him. I stared into his amorphous face as if looking right through him. "You know what I can do. Now get up." He wasn't going to let me die there. He wasn't going to leave me alone. He wanted me for himself. He was right. I had no other choice. So I raised my hand up and grabbed his arm. Somehow, as if my legs were moving by themselves, I began to follow him up my staircase. He's going to torture me. We started walking toward my bedroom. The door was shut. As we were in front of my room, he pointed at my door handle, looked at me and smiled. I knew there was no way out. I had no strength left to run, no strength left to think, no strength left to feel. So I grabbed the handle and opened the door. When I looked inside, expecting to see dead bodies and burning flesh, I saw something that caught me by surprise. It was my laptop, the one I had thrown out the window earlier. It was sitting on my bed. The demon walked into the room, stood at the foot of my bed, looked at me and said, "Come, you need to use this device." So I walked forward once again, as if not by my own will, sat down on my bed and picked up the computer. Nothing was open, just my desktop with the regular icons. Nothing strange. This, now that I think about it, was probably the strangest thing of all. It has been a very long time since I have spoken with a human. I was too tired to respond. I forgot how fun it was to distort your world and watch you break down in fear. Somehow I managed to say, "What do you want from me?" I could ask you the same thing. You were the one who brought me here in the first place. I was so confused, so tired. I just wanted him to kill me. "I'm not going to kill you, 3-man 4694. There's no fun in that." I knew what he was saying, and I tried to feel something, but there was no way. I was too depleted. Just an empty shell. "I'm going to give you 2 choices now. 2 very important choices." I looked at him with the most lifeless stare. "Listen closely. Your first choice is to live the rest of your days with me. I could have great fun torturing you the rest of your life." I had no response. "Or you can choose to send me to another, because I would love a change of scenery." All I could do was stare at him. Then, out of nowhere, I found the strength to say, "I hate you." He smiled as I said this. He leaned down, put his face next to mine, and whispered, "Make your choice, human." And suddenly, a window opened on my screen. It looked like a sort of VPN client. Some kind of network was being hosted on my computer. For some reason, the SSID was permanently seared into my memory, 4920414D 2050 4149 4D4F4E. For a few minutes, nothing happened. I was the only one on the network. Then, out of nowhere, ping! A message box appeared that read, "Someone has joined the network. Would you like to welcome them?" The demon began to smile. Once again, he said. Make your choice. The choice. I clicked the OK button. A little chat box opened up. I began to type HEELLO. Following that night, the demon that had been haunting me left my life. He vanished as soon as I sent that message, along with the computer sitting in my lap. I wanted to feel remorse for what I had done. Hell, I wanted to feel anything, but all I could do was close my eyes and sleep. When I next awoke, I looked at the clock and discovered that I had slept for 26 hours. It was the first night of sleep I had gotten in 3 days. It had been several years since my experiences with the demon, and I've been using a public computer to write these stories because I was too afraid to own my own again. And it has taken me that long to muster the courage to tell my story to the people of the world, to warn them of that demon that was likely still out there, torturing people for his own amusement, forcing them to pass him on to more people through their internet connections. Beware, he was out there somewhere, and he gave no mercy. I found a weird old fetish site. When I was younger, I found a fetish porn site called don'twakethem.com. This was around 2010 to 2011-ish when I was 13. You might be wondering why a 13-year-old was on a site like that. Well, I had unrestricted internet access and I was a weird kid. Sue me. The site was very Web 1.0 with a black background and the site's title at the top of the page. Everything was written in Comic Sans. The site had pictures of people, usually women, sleeping, with the sleeper's name under each image. Now, I assume this was a fetish site because a lot of the people shown were wearing clothes. Some were naked, sure, but it wasn't in an outright sexual way. It was more like they were just sleeping in the nude. I think the thing people were supposed to get off to was the sleeping. The pictures, from what I remember, were taken in the sleeper's bedroom. The room was dark, but you could still see the sleeper because the photographer used a flash. Not sure if that woke that person up, since the only pictures posted are those where the subject is sleeping. I remember checking out the site a couple of times, mainly to skip to the pictures of naked women. Listen, when you're 13 and horny, tits are tits, okay? However, I didn't visit too often since the general vibe of it creeped me out. It felt voyeuristic in a way that made my skin crawl. I ended up finding new places to get my jollies and forgot about the site for years. I eventually weaned myself off of my prepubescent porn addiction, though not before getting a monster of a virus on the family computer, and instead focused on trying to get a girlfriend and, possibly, laid. You know, normal teenage boy shit. Anyway, let's fast forward to a couple of days ago. I was listening to a podcast advertise Casper mattresses, which somehow reminded me of don'twakethem.com. A bunch of old memories popped into my head, and I decided to look it up. The site doesn't exist anymore, instead taking you to a page listing similarly named sites. On a lark, I decided to put the URL into the Wayback Machine and go back to 2011. The familiar black background and Comic Sans text popped up, along with a ton of images of sleeping people. It was just as weird as I remembered. However, I noticed something this time that I hadn't over a decade ago. All the bedrooms looked different. Now, that may not sound like much, but for a site that appeared to specialize in very low-budget fetishes, that means a lot. These productions tend to just reuse the same sets, which are usually just someone's apartment. Here, though, every bedroom looked different. The walls were painted a different color, depending on the image. Some bedrooms had windows while some didn't, and none of the bedrooms had their furniture arranged in the same way. Maybe it was a bunch of people doing this independently in the same style. They'd take their picture and send it here. That seemed like the most logical and least creepy explanation. Morbidly fascinated by the site, I kept scrolling through it. There were dozens upon dozens of images of people sleeping, all taken in that weirdly voyeuristic way. I also noticed that there seemed to be images of teens and children sleeping too. They were clothed, but it still felt squicky as hell. As I was scrolling, I came across a picture of a kid who had the same Spider-Man bedsheets I did as a kid. Actually, that kid had the same posters in his room that I did, and the same bionicle figure on his nightstand that I did. With growing dread, I looked at the name under the image. It was mine. Okay, what the actual fuck? How did this site have this picture of me? It didn't look like a picture my family took. It was in the same style as every other image on this site, with that same camera flash. I looked for some sort of email or contact on the site, but found nothing. I went ahead a bit on the Wayback Machine, hoping that maybe the site would list it later on. The site only lasted until 2014, where it kept updating with new images. Its last image was of a woman named Riley Ashcroft, but there was no contact info. Going back before 2011 didn't turn up anything either. I tried Googling the site to see if anyone had ever talked about it and found basically nothing. It's like no one else knew about this site. I wasn't sure what else to do or where to even discuss something like this. I decided to try putting this weird site out of my head and hoped it'd make more sense in the morning. The next morning, after a pretty light sleep, I checked the site on the Wayback Machine again. However, the site was no longer archived there. According to the Wayback Machine, someone had requested the site be removed. What the hell? Was the site taken down because I looked at it? How would someone even know that? Unless, maybe I didn't see the site. Maybe I imagined it or mixed it up with a dream. Not sure how I'd do that, but at that moment it seemed like the best explanation. I mean, it's not like there was any proof that any of this existed outside of my head, right? I went about my day, trying and failing to put this entire thing out of my head. I put on some headphones and listened to a podcast to help myself sleep. I had nightmares of camera flashes. That brings me to this morning. I saw that I got an email from someone going by Sleepyhead. Just that name made my stomach drop. Taking a deep breath, I opened the email. The only thing the email contained was a picture of me taken while I slept, with that same signature camera flash. What really freaked me out was that, in the picture, I was wearing those same headphones I wore last night. Hi Eddie Wunti. Internet friends. Alright, so it looks like I'm finally writing this. It's been a while since the events I'm about to describe, about 3 to 4 months. I lost count. These white walls really drain us of reality, don't they? But the events that took place over that month continue to shake me up. My caregivers told me I occasionally wake up with a scream, in a pool of sweat. I don't remember it though. No dreams have come to me since... Well, I'm not going to go into that. It was something different. No amount of therapy has helped me. Antipsychotics numb the pain, but they do not stop the memories. It seems the whole world has given up on me. I'll give this a few days, let you hear out my story. Then I'm going to end it. It all started on a crisp winter day sometime in November 2019. My few friends, Sean and Sam, were out for the week doing whatever it is they were doing. My mum was at daycare with Molly, my sister, and Dad was at work. The whole house was mine for the time being. Most kids would probably think it was a dream come true to have the freedom to do whatever I desired, even if only for a couple of hours. That's what I thought. That was until I raced downstairs for the console controllers and realized the fucking whore hid them. Again. The frustration was turning into numb disappointment at this point, but the lack of trust still hurt me. I could have tampered with Mom's meds or something like that. But to be completely honest, I didn't blame her. The foster home I resided in was pretty run down. The nurse was a complete crackhead. The schooling wasn't that great either. And the minor facial deformities running down my cheek didn't help much. I know my mother isn't the type of person to get an idea out of my personality based on that alone. But still, things reached a boiling point when I brought a knife to school. I wasn't going to use it. Maybe. Shit, I'm getting off topic. Anyway, the only thing I could really do was scroll through my Instagram feed to pass the time. I was doing exactly that when a new notification appeared. Re-neurosis is following you. I didn't give it too much thought. Every 5 seconds, some perv tries to get in good with me, so it was habitual of me to blow them over. So, like I said, I didn't put too much thought into it. Time passed, the minutes morphing into hours. Dad was still on his late shift. Mum was nowhere to be seen. Taking a final glance at the driveway through the blinds, I saw no cars. Mom had ordered me not to call or text any friends while she was away. I guess she thought I was going to watch porn or traffic weed the second she stepped out the door. I was desperate for some form of communication though, so I broke that one rule. I called Sam. I sat there for a while, talking and looking over any trending tweets I could come across. And of course, we unloaded shit on pretty much everyone in our class. It's not that I'm antisocial, and I wouldn't exactly consider myself a sociopath. It's just, well, I don't even know at this point. Virtually everyone in my school turned into an asshole at one point or another. Sam, Sean, and a handful of other kids were the only exceptions, so it felt kind of comforting to lay down what we really thought about everyone in the safety of our homes. Sean joined on with us sometime around 8. We talked and challenged each other at cup pong for another hour or so until Sam had to hang up. Sean and I made promises to see each other the following Friday and also hung up. There wasn't really anything left to do. My phone was dying and, naturally, Mum had taken the liberty of hiding my charger. I took a last look over at the clock resting on the kitchen counter. 9:40. The only thing to eat was left over from the shitty Thai place down the block, and I didn't feel like wasting my battery life shame-watching my favourite vlog channels, reminding myself that they're 10 times richer than I'll ever be. So I kind of just stretched out on the couch and let myself drift off. A minute the phone rang. I was already buried in my covers and didn't feel like picking it up, so I just put my head in my hands and let it ring. It went to voicemail and Dad's thundering voice boomed through the speakers. "Hey kid, it's me. Listen, I have to cover someone's shift tonight. Won't be home until around 10. Your mother should be home soon. There are leftovers in the fridge. Love you." A beep sounded and the message ended. I peered over at the clock rested on the kitchen counter. It was 7:45. Again, Mum hid the console controllers, so the only practical thing I could think of was messaging Sean. The second I logged into Instagram, though, I made an unusual discovery. Neurosis had messaged me 56 times within the last hour. The usual pervs will send me around 1 to 3 requests or message me something around the lines of, "Hey pretty boy," but this was different. Just then, another 3 notifications popped up, all reading the same thing: Neurosis is following you. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was out of curiosity, maybe because I knew the messaging and harassment would continue if I chose to continue ignoring it. Being home alone, my nerves were on end. I waited and waited. No response. So I put down my phone and shut off the bedroom lights, trying to catch some sleep. I was awoken no more than a minute later with the sound of my phone buzzing. Another notification on Instagram, this one from my cousin. I was initially relieved that there was someone I could socialize within the few hours I actually had to myself, until I read the message, "Mom in crash on 18th BLV, stay put." My eyes widened. Dad called me soon after, and this time I answered. Some asshat was on his phone and rear-ended her. Every 2 seconds, Dad's voice would break down. I could tell for once he wasn't completely sure of himself, of anything, anyone. He went on, ordering me to stay home and stay in contact with my cousin. He also told me Mum was going to be okay, but Molly suffered a mild injury to the head along with a concussion. "It's going to be okay," he kept telling me, and I believed it. I forced myself to. He wished me a good night and hung up. Just before sulking to my room, I logged back onto Insta, replying to my cousin's text. A final notification appeared at the top of the screen. Message from Neurosis. A bland hello was typed out on his side of the message wall. I texted back the same. It seemed his response came instantaneously. "Do you want to play a little game?" Logos, followed by several smiling emojis. At the time, I thought it was some kind of a joke or code for cannabis or something like that. Either way, I messaged him back saying something like, "Yeah, sure," and powered off my phone. And then I forgot about it. I closed my eyes, lay back, and thought. Just sitting there, thinking. I can't tell you about what exactly. Maybe it was my mum's health. Maybe it was Molly. Or maybe... Never mind. I'm getting off topic again. The next morning, I woke up around 12 to the sound of sizzles. Dad was home. Somehow, I forced myself up and marched down the stairs, where he greeted me. He handed me a plate of bacon and a small glass of orange juice. I nodded my head, as sort of a thankful gesture, and picked up my phone. There were several new messages. 2 were from Sean reminding me to get together with him on Friday. 2 were from my cousin. 2 were simply system updates or notifications from games I've downloaded but haven't played in years. And then there was one that stuck out. This one was from Sam. Carefully I read it, inspecting every word. Woke up to weird noises outside. Were you cutting through my backyard again? There wasn't anything particularly alarming about it. Last Halloween, Sam had stayed home sick with the flu. Sean and I thought it would be fun to hop over his fence, cut through the lawn, and tap on his window to scare the shit out of him. It was, to say the least, very effective. Number was home, all night. Figuring that was that, I put down my phone and dug into my breakfast. The lack of sleep added onto the boulder of stress seemed to work my appetite, since I finished the whole plate almost instantly and asked for seconds. My phone buzzed. I thought it was Sam, so I left it be. It buzzed again, another notification, and another. By now, the noise by itself was testing my nerves, so I checked anyway. According to my notification wall, I had 2 new messages from Neurosis on Instagram. I logged on and swiped over to my followers page and tapped on his username, then went over to recent messages. Both were images. My eyes widened in horror. My hand shook uncontrollably. I wish I just looked away. But I didn't. My neck was snapped into position, my eyes scanning the screen. I let out an appalling cry and startled Dad. He came over to comfort me, to ask what was wrong. He peered over my shoulder at my phone. He followed my gaze. And then he saw it too. The first image depicted the corpse of an embryo lying in some kind of cellar, surrounded by flies, maggots, and rats. A pool of dried blood circles it. The second message was just below it, this one a video. I couldn't bring myself to play it, but the thumbnail said enough already. A frail woman, half naked and wearing tattered clothes, sat between 2 standing robed men. Their faces were blurred. Both had their hands on the back of her head, forcefully shoving it into an abnormally large bowl of soup resting on the table in front of them. Her face was a ghastly white. I had heard stories about deep web torture videos from the kids at my lunch table. I just never thought I would see one. Dad was on top of it almost immediately, blocking the user and calling the police. My phone, along with the images on it, was handed in. They told us there wasn't really much that could be done. Still, life went on. It was dark by the time we got home, and we had gotten a call from the hospital beforehand that Molly was going to be okay. The police had also given me back my phone on the condition that I would immediately report any suspicious behaviour to either them directly or Dad. The next day, 14 hours after my account was privated, my phone buzzed. New message on Instagram. I figured Sean would try to get into contact with me after all of his recent calls were sent straight to voicemail. The notification was still visible. I tapped on it and was immediately brought to a Neurosis's message page. Only one text was displayed. Let the game begin. You probably expect me to tell you that I haven't slept since or something along those lines. But the truth is, I forgot the entire incident within the span of a week. Mum got home from the hospital, Molly was recovering, and Dad had found a new higher-paying job with shorter work hours. I deleted Instagram for obvious reasons, but Sean had convinced me to go back on Twitter and Facebook so we could still keep in touch over the break. My life seemed to be improving. But then, it happened. Sometimes I don't remember the exact date. During spring break, Dad and I were binging Stranger Things when Mum called. The tone of her voice was a mixture of anger and dismay. It took me a while to actually calm her down and get her to explain what had happened. Apparently someone had maxed out her debit card. $40,000 worth of savings had somehow disappeared overnight. I handed the phone over to Dad. His calm voice seemed to soothe her, but I could still hear the screaming on the other end. They went to the bank and found out the thieves had used every cent on the black market, where it was virtually untraceable. I both reasoned with myself that there was nothing I could do and empathized with Dad. He had it rough lately, especially since Molly had made a habit out of sprawling her initials, MK, on every piece of furniture we owned when we weren't looking. Over time, Mum managed to insure some of the money. Dad's job covered our medical expenses. Still, life never really went back to normal. The debit cards were just the beginning, though. 4 days after the incident, Sean and I met together just as promised. We locked ourselves in my room and Googled rap tracks, putting our own comedic verses on top of every song. It started off as a joke of sorts. Then we started recording it. The tone shifted from comedic to emo rap. Of course, we had our laughs here and there, but mostly we were serious about our music. After brief post-production, we had some 20 short songs mashed together into one tape. We told a story. It took a while to render, so I didn't have the time to show Sam the completed version. So I went onto Facebook with the intention of uploading the song. Facebook was linked on my Google homepage, so I was able to get on immediately. I was met with the Facebook login screen. Strange, since I swore I hit save username and password after creating my account. Regardless, I typed in my username, along with the password, and clicked login. Nothing. A red text appeared underneath it, reading invalid login. Bullshit, considering I used the same password for all of my accounts and had confirmed it after first signing up. So I tried again. Same thing. It wasn't the worst thing that could have happened, seeing that my account was barely 5 days old and had literally no content on it. But still. I created a new account, typing in my password, key by key, and clicked my way through the opening tutorial users are created with after signing up. I was searching through my file explorer for the song file when I detected something near the bottom of my page under recommended users. I scrolled down and leaned in, focusing on the third recommended user's name. It was my account, and I was online. My fingers went cold and started quivering again. The gut-wrenching feeling returned. I clicked on the user icon and was brought to the page. It was horrifying. Every picture I had ever posted was switched for an obscene image of a corpse or a dismembered body part. I scrolled down. More pictures loaded in. An infant child covered in rat feces. A half-naked teenager laughing as he bathed in animal urine and needles. 2 grown men with jagged scars across their body, shackled and bathed in vinegar. They were looking up at the camera, wearing fake smiles, their faces twisted in agony. Glass shards were carelessly spilled into their eyes. And there was blood too. Bags. Office blood. It wasn't just that. There were pictures of people in there too, with what looked like their home address listed directly under. The entire description I wrote out was tampered with and replaced with tangled binary code. I immediately flagged every image from the top of the page to the bottom. I also contacted the Facebook privacy department and filing a complaint. I didn't tell Dad, nor did I phone the police. At the time, I was completely blinded to the fact that things like these should be reported. Besides, I had already filed a complaint. The images would be taken down within a matter of days and the perpetrator would be caught. At least, that's what I told myself. The account did get taken down the next day, along with a message from Facebook. The person behind it was never caught. Fearing that they would somehow get access to my Twitter as well, I deleted my account. There wasn't much to do from there. I tried to forget. It wasn't as easy this time. The amount of spam mail in my inbox also increased. Most of them were just dead links that I didn't dare to click, but sprinkled in between, there were random messages. Not messages in the traditional sense. Messages as in a picture of someone, usually a child, with their head cropped out of the picture, holding a cardboard sign. All of them came from the same place, Carrie Kids Company. The messages started off as innocent drawings and highs with the eye stylized as a heart. But then they progressively got darker and more aggressive. Answer the door. What's wrong? Don't you love us? Stop hiding. There are eyes in the walls. Visit us. Don't trust her. You fucking gat! That's around the time I stopped answering them. It should have been sooner. Strangely, I never reported this to the police, the Google Help Administration, or even my own parents. I've grown a complex about it, an irrational fear of sorts that giving my problems will only exploit me and make the problems worse. Anyway, I was perfectly capable of handling it myself. That was until I started receiving the death threats. I only read through one of them and had no intention of reading the other 10 I received regularly. No cute little messages sprawled on pieces of cardboard, just threatening emails. It was around this time that Molly really started pissing me off. Ever since coming home from the accident, she would make a routine out of coming downstairs wasted, taking her meds, and locking herself in her room for the rest of the day. Then, she'd come out in the middle of the night to fuck with me. The first time I can remember this happening was when I woke up to giggling and found her in my closet, drooling on a stuffed dragon I played with as a toddler. Looking back, this was notably disturbing. But for whatever reason, I kind of thought it was cute and silently led Molly back to her room. She wouldn't actually go in, of course. The door was closed. She just stood there and banged her head against it. I was in no mood to deal with this, so I just kind of left her there and figured Mum would take care of it. The lack of sleep and constant paranoia started to get to me. My eyes became wild and veiny. My temper shortened. It got to the point that Mum forced me to start visiting a psychiatrist. 2 days later, I was diagnosed with insomnia, whatever the hell that meant. My mood was worsening by the day, with mild depression to top it all off. The routinely night terrors didn't help either. Dad saw it too, which is why he was the one to propose visiting my aunt in Boston for a few days. The vacation actually somewhat helped me. The pool, along with Aunt's pantry of snacks, helped me recover from my daily home life. I was lying near the pool, resting. The few particles of water singed off my chest and melted into my skin. And just as quickly as it came, my vacation was gone. I was awoken to a blood-curdling scream. It was my younger cousin Theodore. I sat up and watched as Aunt helped him out of the hot tub and tried her best to appease him. His eyes filled with tears. He mumbled something through tears before collapsing onto the pavement. The ambulance arrived shortly afterward, but it was too late. Somebody had put a pair of water snakes in the tub, one of which bit him. He succumbed to his wounds on the ride to the hospital. There was a small family gathering before we headed back home, back to the nightmare. On the way back, our luck somehow worsened. Both of our tyres had slits in them, so we had to spend the weekend at some crappy motel a few blocks over while it was repaired. All these things began piling up on me, became nearly unbearable. Then, just as I was recovering from my insomnia, I woke up near 2 o'clock in the morning. Seeing I was already up and running for the day, I figured I could go to the kitchen and grab a glass of milk before quickly heading back to bed. As I headed towards the kitchen, I noticed our hotel door was open by a crack. I went to close it and, well, I don't really know how to describe it. An uneasy feeling dawned on me. I spun around and saw a bug-eyed Molly staring at me from the corridor, her left eye twitching uncontrollably. Something had changed with her. Even with most of her coated in darkness, I could still see it. "Oh, fuck off," I muttered. She didn't budge. Like me, her face remained emotionless. Slowly, she tilted her head at me and softly purred. I kicked a nearby pillow at her. She pointed at me, smiled, and disappeared down the hallway. We arrived home the next day, and almost instantly, Sam called. The loss of my cousin still stung, so I tried to take my mind off it. We talked for a little about our classes, gossiped about our teachers. He burst out laughing at everything I told him. This was the first sign that something was wrong. Sam, although an amazing and supportive friend, hadn't laughed since his brother died 3 years ago when we were in the 5th grade. And there was a hint of despair in his laugh. A small part of him seemed to be holding back. His breaths were abnormally deep. There was an awkward silence just as Sam's end of the line fell into silence. "Sam?" I asked, holding my breath in. The silence continued. I was about to hang up when something on the other end of the line caught my attention. There was silent whimpering, followed by a series of thuds as if the phone had been dropped from his hands. The whimpering continued, turning into a muffled cry. He picked up the phone. I asked again, "Sam, you still there?" No response from his end. The muffled crying continued, barely overlapped by the static. Then another voice came in, A grown man's voice whispering something inaudible. I couldn't make out anything except for the last sentence. "Come on, say it." Sam got back on. Like any good friend, I asked him if he was okay. He changed the subject. This went on for some time. I continuously asked him what had happened, or if his dad was home if he was okay, and every time I asked, his response was the same. "Do you want to come over?" Eventually, I gave up and told him I was going to bed. He persisted, causing me to hang up on him. Looking back, I guess I felt somewhat sorry for him. It was common knowledge in my school that Sam was a victim of abuse by the hands of his dad. He told me and Sean stories about the things the fuck did to him. Horrible things. The violence seemed to have a toll on his personality too. He was a quiet kid, always sitting by himself at recess, always pushing away any extra help our teacher offered him. Whenever Sean and I asked him to do something, say a favor, he would do it with little to no questions asked. The unquestioning obedience he showed was both admirable and somewhat disturbing. So I was a little surprised when he FaceTimed me about a minute later, and stupidly I answered. I guess I thought I could have smoothened things out with him or something. But the second I answered, he barraged me with a series of cusses and accusations. "You fucking narcissist!" he screamed. I tried to reason with him. Every time he insisted that I come over, and every time I denied, the screaming continued. It was just then that I realized the box, where his face was supposed to appear as black as if his camera wasn't functional. My reasoning turned into pleading. My friend had turned into somebody else. Eventually, my temper flared. I cussed him out and told him to go to hell before hanging up and burying my head in my arms. Tears poured down my cheeks. The phone rang again. Sam was requesting to FaceTime me. My temper had faded and, to be honest, I couldn't afford to lose anyone else, not this time. I answered. The camera was working this time, so I was immediately greeted by Sam's face. His eyes were watery and his face scarlet red. I could tell he was trying to seem brave, but something in his eyes gave it away. He was terrified. "Sam?" He took 2 steps back, swallowing hard. In his hands was a cardboard sign. On it, written sloppily in the black Sharpie maker, were 4 words, "Come or I die." My legs felt weak again. I had to use my free hand to steady the other as to not drop the phone. Sam began wailing, this time out loud. My mouth couldn't work. All that came out were a series of stammers. I heard somebody pump a shotgun in the background. Sam was shaking as well, but refused to let himself fall. The camera suddenly spun around, revealing a man in a gas mask on the other side, mostly concealed by darkness. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. Needless to say, I threw the phone just as the shotgun discharged. Mom and Dad stormed in and saw me punching my pillow in anguish, my phone half across the room. We went to the police with it, and they allowed us to stay the night with protective services, while a caretaker looked after both the house and Molly, as she came down with pneumonia 2 days ago and was still too weak to leave the house. Therapists came in and out all night, trying to help me cope with the trauma. It was different this time, though. The fear left me. The memories didn't. We woke up the next morning and were given a complimentary breakfast at the hotel across the street. Dad got his keys and we headed home. The lock on our gate was broken and the flower beds Mom planted in the spring were trampled, although I didn't initially notice it. Dad made his way up the steps and knocked on the door. No answer. Dad opened the door himself and headed upstairs, entering the guest room. Holy shit! Mom and I entered after him. Mom immediately broke down in tears and crouched in the corner of the room. Dad tried to comfort her. And me? I stood there, emotionless, slowly inching forward, step by step. My mouth became moist. I could feel the colour drain from my face. There, resting only a few feet in front of me, was the mangled body of the caretaker. His face was carved into a hideous glass-glow smile. His eyelids were pulled and stapled to his forehead. Blood dripped down and met with the tips of his cheeks, lengthening the exaggerated smile. Police arrived soon after and cleared up the room. He then ordered me to wait outside while he showed Mom and Dad something. Dad inched out of the room a few seconds later and explained what had happened. Near 2 o'clock in the morning, while our caretaker was most likely asleep, 3 masked men in black trench coats broke through the front gate and entered the house through a window in our living room. He mentioned in explicit detail that the intruders were aware of the cameras and often waved at them, pointing to something outside. They didn't steal anything. They roamed the house, taking down the cameras as they went by, as if they were looking for someone. Dad droned on as I went down the steps and outside onto the patio. The frigid air hit me like a slap and the broken gate creaked open. Dad started chasing after me. The door to Molly's room creaked open as I sprinted by. Hesitantly, I neared the blue mailbox stationed outside the house and opened it. Inside was a USB port and a note. It was fun while it lasted. Thank you for looking after our very own sweet little Maggie Cohen for us. You can keep her if you wish. We already have what we came for. Your sister has a very unique face. It took us a lot of slicing and dicing to get Maggie's just right. Yours was even trickier. I feel that our work speaks for itself, though. Too bad you never got to see it. We had to pour in lots of effort, but after seeing those wonderful photos you posted on your story, we figured it would be worth our while. Speaking of the devil, don't worry, she's having a wonderful time right here. Why don't you watch for yourself? Remember to be careful next time you're online. Tilda at RE Neurosis. P.S. Maggie would like her snakes back. You're the earliest convenience. Birth log. It's amazing what can come from just Googling your own name. It can even manage to be the biggest mistake of your life. The internet is both a wonderful and heinous creation, a vast digital landscape compiled of untold gigabytes of information. The trouble is, once you really go looking, you never know what you might find on there. I admit fully to being a child of the internet, being one of many who were exposed to it at a young age and grew with it over time. From clunky internet connections to slick smartphones and touchscreens, technology that would have been nothing short of futuristic to my 8-year-old eyes when I had first sat behind a computer. It was 11 years ago that I accessed the internet for the very first time. Up until that point, I thought I could deal with anything that I could encounter on the internet. But I admit that the internet isn't as wonderful as I seem to make it out to be. There was the only discovered underbelly of the internet, the dark web, which I, along with everyone else, was, thankfully, only vaguely aware of, along with fetish websites and other kinds of debauchery. Over the years, I've been exposed to things far beyond my age range and understanding. Probably everyone, as at one point in their lives, has seen something either weird, horrifying, or both on the internet. Sometimes that trauma can linger in the back of your memory, even when you think that you've triumphed over it. This was something altogether different for me. It was out of a mixture of millennial boredom and slight egotism that I searched my own name online. I had done it before and expected the results to be no different. A few obituaries, maybe some other people that shared my name, or had been born around the same time as I was. You know, the usual results that one who expect to get when they search their own name. As I scrolled down the page, there was one result that caught my eye. www.birthlog.com. There was no description for below the link, just a simple website domain sitting amidst articles and obituaries. I found myself intrigued by the shortness of it, of the mystery that seemed to lurk behind it. But at the same time, I found myself equally intrigued. I thought that it might be a website that compiled birth dates or medical records. So out of curiosity, I decided to click on it. The front page that greeted me after the short load time was not what I expected. The design of the web page was simple to the point of being unappealing. It was just a completely black background, save for some small red text in the center of the screen. As I scrolled downwards, I realized it to be a set of 8-digit codes, each uniquely numbered, stretching down almost endlessly. To be honest, it took me aback a little. I wasn't expecting something so simple to have such an amount of text. It had been the most I had ever seen on a website, and I was almost afraid that I might crash my computer. I found my interest hovering over one such line, 03021998. As I roved the cursor over it, I realized that it was a link to another page. I soon realized that all the other lines of numbers were to separate pages, each assigned to that individual line of code. Of course, I could have clicked on any other available one of them, but it was that order of numbers that caught my attention. There was something almost familiar about the numbered jumble I had found. After hesitantly clicking on the link 03021998, it directed me to a white web page with a single video in its center. I suddenly felt a little anxious about playing the unmarked video with no prior knowledge of what I might be in for. I was afraid that it might be just another screamer prank, or even worse, some twisted porn video. However, just as I was about to close the window, the video began to play by itself. The video itself was shot in black and white from what looked like a security camera feed. It was completely silent. It was filming what looked like a sterilized operating room, where a figure was lying on a gurney in the center of the room. A closer look revealed that the figure was a woman dressed in a pale hospital gown who was strapped to the gurney by her hands and ankles. But this wasn't just any woman. She was heavily pregnant, the swell of her stomach visible through the trailing folds of the gown she was wearing. The woman looked to be more than a little nervous as she looked around the room. She looked as if she was expecting someone, and I saw her silently call out for someone. Her clothes had dampened with a fine sheen of sweat under the hot operating lights that illuminated her, like an unwilling star playing out on some demented stage. The whole thing was almost theatrical to extent, like it was some clever viral marketing for some new horror movie, or maybe some even more obscure product. Due to the soundless quality of the video, I could only try to guess what it was that she was yelling. From the way her lips were moving, it looked like she was yelling something like Daniel or Doctor. What drew my attention the most was the rising fear on the woman's face as she began to struggle against her restraints, her emotions escalating from uncomfortable confusion to outright screaming in panic when she realized just how helpless and alone she was in that room. I felt a nauseous wave churn upwards within the pit of my stomach. This didn't seem like acting. Her terror almost looked real. And as disturbed as I already was by the first few minutes of the video, I had a lingering dread that things would only get worse. And believe me, they did. The woman suddenly stopped struggling as three figures entered through an unseen door at the lower right-hand bottom of the screen. Her mouth fell open slightly as her face became unreadable, eyes wide with what seemed like shock or muted terror. I almost followed suit when these three new characters shuffled into the center of the room on screen. They were of varying heights and dressed in plague doctors' outfits. I had never seen plague doctors' outfits outside of history books on the Middle Ages or movies. I guessed that they might have been two males and a female, but they were near androgynous because of their strange outfits. The tallest, wearing a hatted black mask with a leathery sewn design to it, stepped forward with a raised hand, so uncomfortably close to the bound woman's face that the grotesque beak of their mask practically scraped her cheek. I felt unclean just watching his gloved hand rove down the side of her pale cheek, soaking up her tears as she sobbed in terror. It was almost as if he was comforting her, in his own bizarre, twisted way. The other two, who hovered about in the background, preparing something unseen with their backs turned to the camera, wore similar bird-like masks. The shorter of the trio, wheeling a metal tray, wore a completely white plague mask that looked like it was made of latex from the way it reflected slightly under the dimmed operating lights. The other wore a brown mask with a brimmed hat, one that almost comically resembled a gardening one. The odd thing about all of them was the visible lack of zippers and buttons on their clothes, something that would have easily indicated to me that they were just actors in costumes, and maybe even eased the growing sense of dread I felt just by watching the video. Their appearance made me even more uneasy about watching the rest of it. I was actually half convinced that this might have been some kind of twisted fetish film, just for how bizarre it was. Yet I found that I couldn't stop watching it. It was almost as if some unseen force had coiled around my chair as I was sitting there like a boa constrictor, preventing me from closing the tab or from even getting out of my seat. I even found myself morbidly curious about what new direction the already strange video would take with these three surreal new figures. I saw the woman scream again, fully terrified now as her struggles to free herself became more violent, her body jolting up from the table. He nodded to one of the others, who wheeled over a gas can. Connecting it to a breathing mask, the doctor slid it over the woman's mouth, albeit with some difficulty, owing to her violent terror. Soon, the woman's limbs grew limp against her captor as the gas began to take effect. Her eyes lolled to the back of her sockets as she slowly and tortuously lapsed into unconsciousness. The female of the group, wearing what looked like a plastic white mask, erected a plastic sheet of the limp body of the pregnant woman, and the tall one, the one who I guessed to be the head of the group, drew a marker and a pair of scissors from a silvery metal sheet, which I had only just noticed was there in the room, but had been too unnerved by the terror of the seemingly captive woman to even notice outside details like that. They cut away the clothes, exposing the pale skin of her vulnerably swollen belly, smattered with pinkish-red stretch marks. Under the near-blindingly white light, it became grotesque to the point of being alien, instead of beautiful as it should have been. He began drawing an incision line down her stomach, plotting each tiny dark dash as if it was a map. I laughed out loud at this point. I nervously refused to believe that any of it was real, that this was playing out in front of me as I sat in front of my computer. It felt more like an art project or a clip from a horror movie. As disturbing as the video had been up to this point, I couldn't accept what was going to come next. They wouldn't actually cut her open, not on camera. As if taunting me, the leather-masked man delicately picked up a scalpel and ran it along the plotted line that he had drawn on the woman's pregnant stomach, parting the pale flesh with a rapidly growing red line. It was at this part of the video that I almost vomited. But I clutched a hand to my mouth as I sat frozen in mute terror at the silently buzzing video that continued to play out in front of me on my very monitor. It was a sight so vile, yet so oddly hypnotic, that I could do nothing but watch it. The plague doctor peeled back the layers of the woman's stomach, slowly exposing her red gelatinous innards that quivered and splattered onto the plastic sheet through the square space in it that the doctor was operating her on through. All throughout the ordeal, the woman remained unconscious and still breathing, with the expansion of her ribcage above the bloody incision that the doctors had made into her abdomen. Under the gas, she looked as if she was sleeping peacefully throughout it all. I was amazed by the fact that she was even alive at this stage. Finally, the doctor came to the quivering amniotic sac within the crater of blood and flesh he had created within the woman's body. He slowly sliced through it, transparent fluid splattering onto his dark robes. Then he felt down the scalpel on the table and reached both gloved hands into the woman's womb. He pulled out a squalling, bloodied yet fully alive infant from the woman's open womb. The white-masked doctor leaned out and snapped the infant's trailing umbilical cord near the base of the navel. It was just the way the doctor held the screaming newborn in his dark hands, his masked expression completely unreadable. He stared into the infant's screwed-up features for an uncomfortably long time as their colleagues cleaned up around them, the woman still unconscious. I swore that the dark eyes almost sparkled with adulation at the child, the one that had pulled into existence just seconds before. The other one handed them a small bottle which the tall doctor opened as he placed the baby into the other's arms. Then slowly, he poured a dark tar-like mixture onto the baby's stomach as it wriggled about in discomfort. With long, longer fingers, he began to steadily massage it into the infant's torso, intermixing the mysterious fluid with. It was then that camera feed abruptly cut out. Despite the increasingly disturbing events that had unfolded out before me, it was only then I jolted in my seats. The screen was black for about 5 seconds before it unexpectedly cut back to video. The brightness of the new footage, when compared to the darkness that I had been so used to watching from the very start of the video, made me shut my eyes. This new camera angle was more awkward, the camera being handled by uncertain hands rather than just being fixed to a wall as it had been for the last 15 minutes. It was clearly some home movie. The footage was in full colour this time, now in a maternity ward where Rose's exhausted new mothers lay in their hospital beds, surrounded by husbands and loved ones as they stared lovingly over their newborn babies snuggled in their arms. The camera's view shifted towards one such mother and her baby. Despite the tiredness plastered across her features and the disarrayed strands of hair that half covered her face, it was only in the daylight that I was able to see the woman's face. Despite the cheery talk between her and the cameraman, who I now guessed to be her husband as they fawned over their sleeping baby, my heart froze at the sight of her. This woman, the one who I had seen operated on and cut open, was my own mother. Despite her womb being cut open and her baby being pulled out of her, she was smiling like nothing was wrong. The bottom of the camera that my father handled had the same set of numbers, 03021998, which I felt that same rising sense of sickened realization, once I realized now the same meaning. மூன்றாம் தேதி பிப்ரவரி 1998, February 3rd, 1998. It was the day I had been born, the baby that my mother lovingly stroked in her arms, the very child that had been cut out of her by those strange beings, was me. As impossible as the whole situation seemed at that very moment of watching, I had just witnessed my own birth on the internet. It was all too much for me to take. I closed the page as quickly as I could, then rushed upstairs to the bathroom, where I gladly purged the contents of my rapidly churning stomach into the toilet. After recovering some courage to go back online, I erased my hard drive. I wanted no trace of that website on my computer. I refused to let myself be reminded of that horrible video. Those random lines of number on the website, they hadn't been just random, but completely separate dates of birth, links to other individual pages, just like my own. What they led to, I don't know, nor do I wish to find out. For the next week and a half, I had nightmares about the plague doctors, particularly the tall one. In my dreams, he would loom over me in the shadows of my bedroom as I lay there in my bed, the same way that he had loomed over my bound mother on that hospital table with the damnable small bottle in his hand. He would force my mouth open before I had the chance to scream, pouring that black tar liquid into my mouth. I felt it to seep into my mouth, down my throat and into my stomach, suffocating me. I would usually wake up screaming, scratching at my throat until dried blood caked the underside of my fingernails. It wasn't if I wasn't new to disturbing things on the internet. I had seen horror movies, read more than a few stories on the internet, not entirely like the one that I'm telling you. It would have been easy to think of it all as some huge coincidence, or at worst, some sick, elaborate prank. But this was different. The whole thing felt raw, real. I knew, in spite of how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, that nothing had been staged about it. Even the home movie at the end had somehow been pilfered from my family's own personal belongings, as I now recalled seeing it as a child on a VHS somewhere. How the website had managed to attain such footage, along with the video of my birth, both terrified and intrigued me, once I had calmed down from the initial shock of video. Despite reason screaming at me for doing so, I knew that I needed to find out more about birthlog.com, the identities of the mysterious masked doctors, just why they had done such a thing to my mother, and of where I had truly come from. Knowing seemed to be the only catharsis for what I had witnessed, as if just affirming that what I had seen, was indeed real, would somehow cleanse it from my memory, and perhaps even finally get the nightmares I was having to stop. I nervously asked a few more technically minded friends if they had ever heard of a website called Birthlog. They had shaken their heads, and after a few searches on the internet, turned up nothing. Not even on the dark web, which one or two of them were actually brave or foolish enough to frequent. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. It was as if all traces of it had been purged from the face of the planet. Eventually I gave up asking them. I decided then and there that the only other time I ever wanted to see that plague doctor again was in my own nightmares. I never spoke to my mother directly about it, for fear of bringing up any hidden memories within her psyche, but I did inquire about the exact circumstances of my birth with her as a way of working around the subject. What hospital was I born in? At what time, and how was I delivered? This last question made her raise her eyebrows slightly. She admitted that my delivery had been a difficult one and that the doctors had given her a cesarean. Apparently my umbilical cord had become entangled around my neck during delivery, and cutting open my mother's womb and removing me was the only way to save me from potential strangulation. My mother's eyes seemed to glaze over with memory. Even though she smiled, there was a trace of fear on her face. She seemed almost lost in a trance as her features scrunched up, trying to remember. But it was as if she was desperately trying to remember something, but had found the clarity of what had once been vivid memories suddenly fogged over. I watched with a burning dread in my throat, remembering the plague doctor's slow sedation of her. She shook her head, trying to shrug off what she thought was just forgetfulness, but I saw the smile she wore was only for me, her expression more unnerved than she had been just a few minutes ago. "I still have the scars," she sighed mirthfully, "but it was all worth it to have you." My mother then smiled up at me, like nothing had ever been wrong. That was the last time I ever discussed the circumstances of my birth with her. Take this as a cautionary tale, if you will. I still have no idea what the hell to make of it, but I prefer not to think about it now. The scars of the video still run deep through me, engraved into my very consciousness. Now that I can never forget the trauma of what I now know, but try to live with it every day. I've never been one to preach about anything, but I think it's advisable not to dig too deep while searching on the internet, because you can only dig so deep before you uncover something that you know you were never supposed to. Believe me, I know, and I'm trying very hard to forget,